On Mondays, we take a look back at the past week in politics on both sides of the river, and today we're starting in Iowa. Lawmakers advanced several education bills last week, including one that would create guidelines for Iowa high schools to have courses on the Bible. This morning, I sat down with our sister station in Des Moines to find out what legislators want to see changed in Iowa schools. All right, Dana, 2 years ago, Iowa lawmakers passed a law that would make it illegal to talk about gender identity or LGBTQ topics for elementary and middle schoolers in Iowa. What do they want to do now?
So now a bill that is being introduced, it actually passed out of a subcommittee last week, but it's kind of just expanding that original bill that would prohibit schools from talking about gender identity and sexuality in the classroom. So right now, it is a current law that bans that discussion up until sixth grade. So now this new bill would expand that for grades 9 through 12, or excuse me, grades 7 through 12. But it is important to note that that previous law did face some legal challenges throughout the course. So it is a law now. However, that wasn't after a federal judge initially put an injunction on it. But then the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals ended up overturning that injunction, allowing it to be a law. And a reminder, this restriction on discussion of gender identity in classrooms, this was originally paired with the bill that would remove books from classrooms depicting sex acts. So I think that was something that was commonly talked about in there, but this was another portion of it. So this bill is essentially going to be doing the same thing in terms of conversations around gender identity, just expanding that grades 7 through 12.
Keeping with education in high school specifically, lawmakers want to create some new guidelines for new courses for Iowa high schoolers. What's that about?
Yes. So another bill that passed out of subcommittee, basically, it would give students the options to take courses on the Bible. So it would require the State Board of Education to adopt guidelines for a course that would teach Hebrew scriptures, courses of the Old or New Testaments. So something that it wouldn't require students to take these classes; it would just give them the option. I think that's something that's important to note within this bill. So there is a lot of back and forth in it, but initially people for this bill just kind of they say it would enhance the knowledge of faith generally, and they think it'd be something very important. But people against it kind of think it singles out a certain religion, kind of making it quote exclusionary, I guess you could say. So it's something that I think we'll see a lot of back and forth for, but it did pass out of subcommittee. And ultimately, it just kind of adds that option for students, not necessarily a requirement, which I think is the key to that bill.
What about when it comes to paying for education? Both the House and the Senate have now passed their funding bills. What does it look like?
Yeah, so this is something that still kind of is in limbo right now. So the Senate originally passed a bill that would increase um, public school funding. So it'd be per pupil 2%, which is essentially per student, 2% increase. Then that bill went over to the House for debate, and they added a 2.25% increase. So before that does become a law, or before it reaches the governor's desk, the two chambers are going to have to come to some sort of agreement. Now, everybody against wants to see a 5% increase per pupil. They don't think the 2% or 2.25% is doing enough, but ultimately, both of that was shut down in both the House and the Senate. That amendment to increase it by 5%. But I think important to note for the House, the reason they wanted to add that 0.25, they said they talked about increasing transportation equity for Iowa's rural districts. Then it also would help fulfill the rest of the teacher salary increases, which was passed last legislative session. So that's kind of where they added that increase. And I know House lawmakers, they said that they think the Senate, once they hear that and take that into consideration, they're hoping they can come to some sort of agreement. But that passed this last week out of the House. So now it'll go back to the Senate to come through an agreement. When it did come through the House chamber, though, lawmakers, they hosted a public hearing. They actually called for a public hearing. And in that hearing, there were about 500 comments posted prior. So there's a lot of passion, a lot of conversations we had around this topic. But kind of the number that we're seeing floated around is the Senate wants 2% and the House wants 2.25%. So it'll be interesting to see kind of where the middle ground comes from and where it all goes from here. So still in limbo, but definitely a lot of progress being made on that end.
Anna, thank you as always for keeping us updated on what's happening on Capitol Hill in Des Moines. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.